Ooh, now I'm so curious. You're driving me crazy.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of 119, a Twin Peaks podcast. My name is Nick. I am joined, of course, by Dylan. Hi, Dylan.
What's up?
And we are joined once again by Jeremiah Beaver, aka Take the Ring. How's it going, man?
Hey, good. How you guys doing?
Pretty well.
Not bad.
And we're here to continue our lengthy discussion about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Thanks to everybody who listened to part one. We've still got quite a lot to talk about here. So I guess we'll just go ahead and pick up where we left off. The last thing we talked about was Laura discovering that the pages were ripped out of her diary, at which point she goes to Harold Smith and expresses a lot of fear about Bob, and he tries to comfort her a little bit, and she is just completely freaked out. And at this point, she runs back home. And the next thing we get as she's on her way up to her room is a truncated version of a scene that I desperately wish was in the final film, which is this terrifying scene with the ceiling fan where it's just an up-close shot, like an extreme close-up of Laura's face as she is seemingly hypnotized by the dreaded ceiling fan who is saying some stuff to her. I think it says, like, I want to taste through your mouth, all this sort of stuff. This is so goddamn creepy. This is, like, one of the creepiest things Lynch has ever done, in my opinion.
I remember on like one of the earlier episodes when we were doing The Return, we had talked about the ceiling fan and how it is so evocative and carries such a weight to it. Although, you know, it doesn't necessarily, or I think we had said it doesn't really like function in any sort of nefarious way. And then through watching Fire Walk with Me a couple times, I think that it actually does, because it's that the sound of it whirring is present through the scene where Laura realizes that Bob is Leland. So it's like this really just realizing like, oh, that's right, that is sort of it's like one of its true like points of horror. And yeah, just this little bit we get here where we get the sound of Bob / the fan just sort of trying to, I don't know, it's like a dissociated reality for Laura, but you can see that she's resisting. It is truly horrifying. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember. Do they? They probably reference it early on in the original show, or at least you see it. And I think it was just kind of a source of inspiration. And then in the pilot, because it's in the shot where, Laura's mom has the vision or remembers. But then I think, in Fire Walk with Me, they definitely expanded that. He expanded that idea. And so now you've got this thing. Like, I always took it as indirectly, directly tied to Bob. Basically because, in the original show, Leland is kind of this like, after Bob leaves him, he's like, oh, I don't remember anything, and like the show kind of paints him as a good guy that was inhabited by something evil. It's more complicated than that, obviously. But then in Fire Walk with Me is what really kind of like, so it's I believe it's part of Leland's like ritual rape, right? Like,
yeah.
So he gives Sarah Palmer,
sure.
I think we see it later, but he gives Sarah Palmer like a sleeping pill. He obviously gives her something that's drugged.
Right?
Yeah, the milk, yeah. Right? That's obviously drugged. And then he turns on the ceiling fan, and Laura has a reaction. And sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, but again, that we see that stuff later. But yeah, this scene in the missing pieces pretty much. If I had any doubt before, after seeing this scene in the missing pieces, it was an aha moment. Like, yes, okay, for sure, Bob this is another clue of Bob wanting to be her. This ceiling fan is tied to Bob, and this is kind of them having a dialogue back and forth, similar to like what's in the diary novel, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, the fan is amazing to me. I'm actually in the middle of watching somebody react to the entire series on YouTube right now, and they just did their like fire walk with me reaction, and the first time that the fan is shown, this person was just like, oh no, not the fan, don't show me the fan, don't show me that. And it's just like amazing to me the way that the show trains you to find this mundane imagery just incredibly ominous, you know, because the fan isn't like, it's just a fan. There's no like, there's not a demon that pops out of it. It's really just, it's just like, it's more the sound than anything. And I just think it's incredible the way that Lynch is able to conjure so much dread with something so mundane.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of many examples of that.
Yeah. So yeah, the next little scene we get here is basically just some connective tissue to the double R scene after it, which is Cooper and Albert back at the Philadelphia FBI station, and Cooper basically predicts the murder of Laura here, where he, you know, describes her as like a blonde high school girl, etc. And Albert is like sort of quizzing him about it to test his to test his foresight in some way. Yeah, and it's just a weird little instance of it being intimated that Cooper already has some sort of connection to the supernatural, some sort of way in which he is keyed into the spirit realm, which was like hinted at in the show, but I feel like through this premonition it's made more explicit. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's clear from this and the dream sequences later on that Dale has some sort of clairvoyance to him. Obviously, you know, watching the first season of the show, the extent of that is, like you said, it's sort of maybe hinted at, or there's, you know, he has quirks about him, but there's nothing indicating that he has such an overt sense of what's going on, and that he even foresaw this whole thing happening. Like, this wasn't necessarily a case he was just assigned to out of the blue. This was something that he actually foresaw a year in advance, and we can assume that he sort of did his research in that time up to the murder of Laura Palmer. So, yeah, it fits itself into the film very well with that, that, like you said, that connective tissue to the scene after it. But yeah, I think that right off the bat, the character of Dale Cooper in Fire Walk With Me is presented to us with a much different air than he is in the original run. He seems in the very first instance that we see him, you know, he's frightened by Philip Jeffries, or the emergence of Philip Jeffries. He's confused. He is worried about a dream. He doesn't have like the charisma that the Agent Cooper from the original run seems to have, and it's just sort of like an interesting juxtaposition, seeing him in this form, which much more resembles some of his more stoic forms of himself that we see in the Return than it does in the original run. But yeah, that's about what I got.
Yeah, and this is also like the only scene that connects to. I believe this might be the only scene that jumps out of the Laura story. I mean, obviously, yeah, it comes right back to it, but you know, I love all the Philadelphia FBI stuff. This is a great Albert moment. So if, like we were talking, there's not a whole lot of levity. There's maybe 2 jokes in the whole movie. So this is the second joke. You know, and he's like, you know, Jesus Christ, you're talking about half the high school girls in America, you know. Right. Great Albert moment. And it's also kind of I don't think this was intentional at all, but this scene always reminded me of. There's a moment in the original Return towards when they're getting ready to bust Ben Horn, and Cooper's like, "Well, wait a minute, I don't know, blah blah blah," and Harry Truman's like, Cooper, look, I've put up with the dreams, I've put up with the stuff, like, kind of has like a come to Jesus moment, right? So I think it's funny. This is Albert, like, all right, here's Cooper going again with the dreams, like, all right, bud, had enough of the dream stuff. Tell us something I can use, tell me something I can use, kind of thing. But anyway, I love Albert, and this is like the only, he's got a couple lines in here, so it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yep, this is all we get of Albert. Yeah, so the way that this connects to the next scene is that Cooper says about the girl that we know as Laura. He's saying she's preparing a great abundance of food. And we cut immediately from there to the Double R Diner, where Laura is picking up the Meals on Wheels that we know that she's going to deliver to Mrs. Chalfont, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah. In the original run.
Yeah, in the original series.
Mm-hmm.
And this is some of the only Double R stuff that we're going to get in this film. This is one of two moments, I think, that we get with Shelley, the other coming with Leo a little bit later, and it is our only appearance of my sweet queen, Norma, unfortunately. Just a brief glimpse here. And Shelley is sort of helping pack the Meals on Wheels into the car, and the real point of the scene is that Laura is confronted by Mrs. Chalfont and her grandson, who is wearing the mask that is sort of reminiscent of the Jumping Man. And the grandson has some really creepy dialogue here, where he says, in sort of a whispered voice, "The man behind the mask is looking for the book with the pages torn out. He is going towards the hiding place. He is under the fan now." So yeah, Laura is given the framed photo here by Mrs. Chalfont, who tells her, like, this would look good on your wall. And we're going to get pretty hot and heavy with this photo in a little bit here. So Laura, she returns home with the photo. She walks slowly up towards her bedroom, and we get another really terrifying moment of Bob sort of emerging from behind her dresser. And to me, this is just like an expertly edited sequence here. Just a really effective jump scare. I always find it really upsetting, mostly because of the audio cue, right? Like, as soon as, like, the second that Bob enters the frame, there's that really, really loud sound, and we get Laura screaming and running away. It's always, I don't know, it gets me every time. It's just super effective, and I always feel a little bit anxious watching this whole scene here. It's good. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, this scene is, I think, where the film really starts to take a turn towards the darkness. Like, I thinking about, Fire Walk With Me, like, as a whole, it does have this air of being very heavy and depressing, and I think harrowing is how you put it, Nick. Like, it's very much that. But for the first, like, hour or so, it does still retain some of the Twin Peaksiness. Like, I've almost, like, kind of, like, forgotten about that. But, like, for the first hour or so, while there's some, scary moments, it doesn't exactly crush your soul the way that it does in the last hour and 15 minutes or so. But this scene where Laura first has the realization and the immediate denial that Leland is indeed Bob is like, this scene hits me among the hardest of any of the scenes. I think there's something to be said about, or there's something for me that I've always found, like, daytime scenes, if executed well, can be far more terrifying than any sort of anything happening like in a more, I don't know, traditional nighttime scary scenario. Like the original Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, has some like really creepy shots of Michael Myers in the middle of the day, just like standing behind the bush. And those ones, like that sort of like, it doesn't have to be taking place at midnight. It can be taking place at 11:30 in the morning, and it's even worse because there's no escape. Like that's the sort of horror and trauma that you feel when Laura is like hiding under that bush, just saying, no, it's not him, it's not him, it's not him. It really, it's and then everything leading up to that, like just seeing Mrs. Chalfont and her grandson, and not only does the grandson have the mask of jumping man, he also has like that talisman that he holds. And I've always sort of thought that those two figures are sort of like a Bob Mike scenario, like they kind of are the same thing. I'm sorry, not Bob Mike, like Mike and the Arm type relationship, where they sort of like fill each other out. But everything leading up to that, like from the weird creepy vibes you get to that, to the really intense jump scare of Bob, to then just being left with Laura prone on the grass in the middle of a school day, just breaking down completely. It for sure, that this scene is where the film, I think, starts to take a turn towards the almost unbearable in terms of how emotionally heavy it is.
Yeah, I don't know what I can add to that. That pretty much sums it all up for me. Just a couple little observations. I don't know, speaking of the double R, yeah, it's a real shame there wasn't more Norma. I'm glad we got a little bit more in the missing pieces. I don't know if you guys noticed. So Heidi, in the German waitress in this, she doesn't have any lines, but she's got a bloody nose. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, you remember I think this serves a couple of functions, and I might be reading too much into it, but I think in the original show, you know, the only two lines Heidi has, is she's late to work because she's too busy jump starting the old man, right? So that's the gag with her, and of course she giggles a lot. So this is just kind of another little like, hey, this is a darker side of Twin Peaks. So not only is the giggly German waitress not giggling, like she's got a bloody nose, you know what I mean? Like she's not happy and excited, and she's got it. And then I kind of take it as another like signal to how the same way that Laura and Leland's relationship is fleshed out in this one. And, you know, you get a hint of this kind of stuff in the show, but you really realize in Fire Walk With Me that this is basically like a domestic abuse story. And I always thought that it was interesting that Heidi, the cheery, giggly German waitress, who's always talking about her husband, and this one, in Fire Walk With Me, she's got a bloody nose, and maybe that came from her husband. Maybe, you know, I mean, that's totally speculation, but regardless, that's another little signal that, you know, we're not in the good side of Twin Peaks. Even though we're back in Twin Peaks and it's better than Deer Meadow, there's still an underbelly of evil going on here, right? And but yeah, the only other thing is the Bob behind the bed thing. So, you know, I saw this the first time, or, you know, before I saw the original show, I saw this. So I had no idea what the hell was going on at this point. But this scene for sure just scared the total shit out of me. And it's the same as the dumpster scene in Winkies and some moments in Lost Highway. Like he uses like there's sound and tone and pacing, and it's all like a big build up. And then there's like, you know, it's one thing to do a jump scare. A lot of movies do jump scares. We're like, you know, this guy behind the corner or whatever. But this is like why David Lynch stuff just like totally destroys you is because there's all this build up with sound and tension. It's all about the build up, you know?
Yeah. Not all jump scares are created equal, I think is the lesson here. It's like cat jumps out of a locker or something. That's a dumb jump scare. That's bad. You'll see that in like a million horror movies. Or like person closes the mirror in the bathroom and there's somebody behind them. It's like you can see that coming from a mile away. But when it's something like this, it feels a lot more powerful because it feels earned, you know. And it's like Bob is Bob is like a real fear for Laura. Like it has a like it has a purpose within the text of the film.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they qualify, I think, as like a jump scare, the way we would see them in a horror movie. But other times, I think it's just David Lynch's use of dynamics in his just film style. Like when Laura's reading her diary and she realizes the pages are missing. It's not a jump scare, but it's the same sort of dynamic shift where you go from that like sort of hip hoppy jazz tune to all of a sudden there's this really loud sound of paper ripping, and it's super jarring and can really put you on edge in the same way as a jump scare, because it's like dynamically stark to what was coming before it, but it is also like you said, playing on Laura's real fears and her like her actual, you know, just the things that could possibly ever go wrong are going wrong in this moment, and you feel that just through a simple sound effect like a page ripping or something. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Dylan, she has this really heartbreaking moment where she runs outside and she's hiding underneath the bushes, and she sees Leland walk out of the door, and this is the moment we're led to believe where she realizes once and for all that Bob is in fact Leland. And boy, just Cheryl Lee's acting here is so painful. This is like some of her most raw acting that she does in this film, with a lot of screaming and crying. Obviously, just the look on her face as she looks at Leland is just really, really painful. Cheryl Lee gets a lot of love now for her performance. At the time, it was like people sort of thought it was a little bit histrionic and over the top, and I can understand that. But I think with moments like these, it's like, man, for somebody that young to be that tapped into this level of emotional pain and give a performance like this is really, really remarkable, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah. I don't even know if it's maybe change in attitudes. I don't know, because I wasn't around back then, but I get the sense that as a society, we're a bit more sensitive to like violence towards women, maybe in 2018 to 19 than in 1991 or 2. So just what may have seemed over the top back then now is actually seeming like a very accurate, relatable portrayal for anyone who has experienced like unbelievable trauma like Laura is going through in this film.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I never really thought about it. I definitely think I think you're right about that. I mean, like I said, I got into this and I was like 15-year-old kid. I'm in like sci-fi and horror, and you don't think about the kind of, I thought about it, but the human element of Laura, and the fact that this is really like a story about abuse and like there's a lot more stuff going on. And I also think that, I think you're right, Dylan. People are looking back and definitely a lot more sensitive to that kind of stuff. There's also kind of the like Lynchian context. I think that this was so like not Lynchian, but like as a result of this being a David Lynch movie as opposed to the Twin Peaks TV show, like the tone is all weird. You know what I mean? So like people were expecting the show, and it's one of those, like, I think people were just shocked by it and didn't know how to take it. And plus, I think that there's definitely this film's ahead of its time as far as graphically and accurately portraying this type of abuse story. And I think nowadays there's like an audience for that. Mm-hmm. Or not, right. You know what I mean? Like people are definitely, totally more receptive to this whole thing. I think people are going back and reviewing it through that lens for sure, and going, even me, like, holy crap, like this was, I didn't get all this stuff when I was 15, but I do now, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the reason that the film has sort of lingered in people's minds, or the reason that it's been given sort of this reevaluation, is directly because it takes Laura's story so seriously and humanizes her to such a degree and asks us to live in her shoes a little bit. You know what I mean? And at the time, like, if you go back and you read some of the initial reviews, there's this tone about it that's sort of, I don't know, there's sort of a mocking tone to some of it, and sort of a lack of understanding as to why we should really be sympathetic to Laura Palmer. Like, oh, she's like this bratty cokehead prostitute, you know, this like annoying high school girl, like, who doesn't really have anything to do with the original show beyond just being a dead body. And it's like, well, why do I care about this? Like, why is this so melodramatic? And like, reading it now, it all feels a little bit cruel. And I think people really overlooked.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's tough to say. Like, a part of me wants to think it was just like a little bit too real for people. Like, I think that at the time people really appreciated the like the artifice and the goofiness of Twin Peaks, and this was just like, why are you throwing in this like this after school special into the world of Twin Peaks, you know? Like, that's very much the vibe that I get from a lot of the negative reviews from the time.
Yeah. And I mean, like, again, like, it's just a different time. Like, some people were on Twin Peaks burnout, you know, like, so the show was a big hit, but the show was a big hit, but it didn't last too long. And it, like, cover Rolling Stone, cover every magazine, everyone was talking about it, all that stuff for, like, you know, like a year straight. It was like the hottest shit in the whole world. And then it kind of fell apart for a few different reasons, and then it was like, okay, David Lynch is going to make a movie. I just,
nobody wanted it at the time.
It sounds like pretentious
Twin
or
Peaks
whatever.
Was very
nobody wanted it.
Exactly. Twin Peaks was very much out of fashion at that time, for sure.
Yeah, and so you got a sea full of critics who are just itching to find something wrong with it. So I think your whole audiences, critics, casual viewers, everybody was just like primed to to criticize.
Yeah, it was really a perfect storm of factors that led to the failure of Fire Walk with Me. It wasn't just any one thing; it was a lot of stuff. And I think that Lynch had been on such a winning streak to that point, and had so much critical acclaim, and won all these awards. You know, Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart, and I guess dating back to, you know, even Elephant Man. And I think whenever that happens, I mean, you still see this today. Like, anytime a filmmaker is on that much of a winning streak, I think there are people who start to really itch for the opportunity to take them down a peg, you know? So it's like the second that they do something that isn't really that well received, it's like the blood is in the water and the sharks are going to feast. You know, I think that happened a little bit with Lynch, and I think there was just a lot of resentment about the way that the second season of Twin Peaks unfolded. So it just created the perfect environment for this film to fail. But yeah, it's like we mentioned last episode, it really is remarkable the way that people have been able to sort of step back from all that context and take another look at it and appreciate it for what it is, and not be upset about, you know, what they felt it should have been at the time, you know. But
yeah, and thank God for that, because I know we need to keep moving on, but I just wanted to say, like, thank God for, like, the internet and millennials and like, I totally think this stuff is getting, I mean, you know, Criterion releases and stuff, like, it's it's really amazing to have people. So I know people now, younger people, that'll watch this now and like, yeah, that was cool or interesting or weird, or maybe I didn't like it so much or blah, blah, blah. But like totally receptive, totally open-minded. And it's just refreshing. Cause like first 10 or 15 years of me being a fan, it was just like, oh God, Fire Walk with Me. I hated that movie, you know? And now it's like, it's a classic again, you know?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the person that I'm watching the reaction videos for, they watched Fire Walk with Me like just like a day or two after finishing the season 2 finale, and they were just like, "That was great. I loved that. That was amazing." And it was like, you know, yeah. And it's like this person,
Awesome.
yeah, and this person,
Yeah, that's how I felt.
I don't know. I had a more complicated thing because like you know, obviously I watched it first, as I've discussed many times, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't come back to it until like The Return was about to come on. Like I didn't it was like a good like 7 years before I actually went back and revisited it, because I started seeing all these articles popping up you know, when The Return was about to premiere, like, oh, Fire Walk with Me, you know, David Lynch's unappreciated masterpiece or whatever. And that was the first time that I started really noticing this reversal of opinion on the film. And when I did go back to it again, I was kind of dreading it. Like, I don't know if what if I don't like this still? But I was like, wow, it hit me a lot harder than it did at the time. And, yeah, I've watched it many times since then. And I really love it. Anyways, so Laura realizes that Leland is Bob, and from here she goes and she meets up with Donna. She sort of knocks on her door. Donna opens the door, and here we get a shot of Laura that was actually reused in The Return when Gordon is at the hotel and he opens the door to meet Albert, and he sees that like big like oversized like holographic projection of Laura in the doorway in front of him. Jeremiah, do you have any thought as to why like that particular shot was reused in that moment in The Return?
No. Haven't really. So that shot in The Return is during the Laura is the One episode. Correct. That's what it's called, I believe, is the title of the 10. Episode. And so you get because the log lady says it. The log lady tells Hawk, you know, Laura is the one. And I mean, who knows? I mean, I think it's a signal that Gordon Cole obviously is part of some larger plan or goal, or because he's the director, he's kind of like the narrator in a way. I don't know. Gordon Cole always seems detached from the action, but he also seems like he knows what's going on. You know, he has some deeper understanding about what's going on with, you know, obviously Blue Rose Task Force, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's just like he has a vision of Laura, and it's around the time that Hawk, the log lady, tells it to Hawk, and, you know, maybe a clue that Laura, you know, so this is post Part 8, so post Golden Orb, like just kind of keeping that Laura imagery alive a little bit, or I mean, who knows? Like, I really don't know. I don't know why it was this shot. You know, because she's in pain, and I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe because plus it's Donna opening a door, and that's Laura standing in her doorway, and Gordon Cole opens the door, and that's the same shot of Laura standing in the doorway. So there's that like connection, I guess. Yeah, but that's all I got.
Yeah, I always just look at that as sort of keeping that Laura thread just ever so slightly alive, you know, because you're right, we did get the Laura orb in Part 8, but other than that, there really hasn't been much mention of Laura in the series for a while. Like, we get the discovery of her diary, and I think that's really the first mention that we get after she is sucked up through the Red Room in Part 2. So I think it's just a way of like foreshadowing the fact that, hey, Laura is still going to end up being extremely important. And you're right, like Gordon is keyed into this in some way. You know, it's just like I just kind of look at it as like a reminder, like, hey, guess what? This show is still kind of about Laura. Don't like let's like I know it seems like we're very far away from that right now, but you know, she is still the heart of the show, and we are still concerned with matters pertaining to Laura. So, yeah, the next scene that we get in Fire Walk With Me is the dinner table scene. And this, to me, is a really strong moment for Ray Wise here because, you know, Ray Wise is he's a very bright and charismatic actor when he wants to be, but I've always been really impressed with the way that he was able to dig down and really just like find his inner darkness for this film in particular, because this is probably, I mean, other than probably the Maddie scene in season 2, this is the most dark depiction of Leland that we see here. The way that he's sort of interrogating her, chastising her, you know, he's asking about this necklace, if it's from a lover. He's sort of badgering her about some perceived promiscuity, which is a very like sick dynamic for somebody, you know, who's sexually abusing his daughter. Yeah, I don't know. I just my main takeaway from this scene is just like how much of a maniac Leland comes off here, and just how scared not just Laura but also Sarah is of him, because, you know, Sarah clearly knows something is happening here. Like those are my big takeaways from this scene. What do you guys think?
Yeah, there's such like a perversion happening where like you really get to see the abuser-abusee relationship and dynamic at play here, because Leland is from the get-go accusing Laura of being dirty and promiscuous, and sort of that's sort of like kind of a like a telltale sign of abuse or like that sort of like emotional manipulation of like you've been abused and you are now tainted and it's your fault. Also, just like an observation on the more Twin Peaksy side of it, when he goes over and grabs her hand, he grabs the ring finger on her left hand and says, "This finger is dirty." This is which is of course the finger that he ends up placing the letter, I think, what is it, R or T underneath, and then also that comes up in the return with the whole spiritual mound thing, and just like a little brief like little glimpse into like, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the supernatural side of things. But overall, this is also up there in just one of those very devastating scenes, because it kind of happens so slowly, and once Sarah starts shrieking, you'd expect that like it's going to reach a fever pitch, but it doesn't. It just sits in this discomfort, and then finally they sit down, and there's like a brief moment of silence, and Leland declares he's not eating anything until Laura actually gets up and washes her hands, and she makes her go through with it, and then she's sitting there just holding a bar, so bawling her eyes out. It is like, it's just so like uncomfortable, and this is maybe one of those examples of like, this is pretty friggin' real. Like, this is a pretty accurate description of like just very intense emotional manipulation, and like a clear abuse of like a power dynamic that her father would have over her, and it just makes you sick to see, and then to see like a completely broken person standing in front of a mirror just watching herself deteriorate while she's supposed to be cleaning her hands. Like it is just it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that. It's just this scene sums up the whole what this movie's all about, which is it's gross and scary, and Yeah, I love that. It's true. The ring finger, the ring, the spiritual mound, the letters under the fingernail, like they're just connecting points like crazy. And like you said, the Sarah at this point, again, this is not the focus of the movie, and it's never even touched on in the original show. But I think this is another element besides, the references in the original series of Sarah Palmer being kind of spooky. In this one, kind of like how you see Leland, like, okay, Bob's inside of him, but he's probably still an abusive guy. And, this scene, you see that Sarah bears some responsibility in this too. And it's obviously not ever, she might not know what's going on because they do show, she's being drugged, right? Or it implies that she's being drugged. But I think that was a thing in the return. I don't want to get into it too much, but when they sat down to do the return, that they probably, well, we got Sarah being kind of spooky in the original series, but also like, hey, she was there the whole time all this stuff was going down. Like, isn't she responsible a little bit? Is there some evil inside of Sarah? And I think that's where you get the frog moth, or may not be happening Judy. Like all the return is kind of Sarah's fire walk with me. Like, you know what I mean? In a way, like seeing the, seeing what she's responsible for and what her evil doings or whatever, just being complacent or not doing, she obviously knows something's going on. Right. And there's a lot of hints, you see a lot of those hints in this movie, even though, this is more about Leland. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I have the same read on what's going on with Sarah in The Return. I always sort of looked at her inhabitation or her link to Judy or whatever as being sort of a, I don't know, like a symbolic way of reckoning with the fact that she knew that something was going on right under her nose in her house and did nothing for it. Did nothing about it, rather. But that's a whole rabbit hole that we could we could go down. But yeah, so later that night, we get a really scary shot of Leland on the bed, sort of rocking back and forth, and he starts crying at one point. It's almost like it's like hinting at the fact that he knows that he's a piece of shit, honestly. And yeah, and it's sort of ambiguous in this film, the degree to which Leland is aware of what he's doing. It's like, does he just sort of go into like a blackout state whenever he's like in full Bob mode and raping Laura? Does he remember what's going on? Is it partly an act of his own will? I think that the way that this movie muddies those waters is one of the more compelling things about it, actually, because I've never been a big fan of what we saw in season 2, where there's like this very clear dividing line between Leland and Bob. It's like Leland was definitely possessed, and that's the reason he did it, and he was completely unwilling, and it's just very black and white. And I think it's just a lot stronger thematically to believe that it might have been some mixture of Bob and then also just him, having that darkness within him as well. And maybe Bob just sort of represents a freedom of inhibitions for him to really embrace his inner darkness.
Yeah, I get that read too. That like Bob is simply, he's just sort of servicing Leland's own id and Leland's own like dark innate desires that any human being may very well, I don't know, have, but there's a civility and a morality that sort of makes those thoughts not even like entertainable for a second, and that Bob is sort of this dissolving of those inhibitions, as you put it, and so he's able to fully just commit to this just animalistic, amoral desire or whatever it is. But I this whole scene of him going into Laura's room and telling her that, you know, he loves her, and kissing her on the head and being very gentle, and to me, it reads as another layer of abuse and an obfuscation of what he is. And maybe he does have guilt and realizes it, but he wields that guilt at Laura in a way that confuses her further and causes her to look up at the angel in the painting and say, is it true? Like, it confuses her even more. And it gives her a bit of hope that ends up completely blowing up on her in a huge way later on when she has the realization. So I definitely think that this depiction of Leland as both a willing and unwilling participant in all of the events is certainly, it rings truer than, like you're saying, the black and white idea of, like, you know, Leland, oh wow, that's right, I was possessed and raped and killed my daughter, that's right. It's like, no, he, not only that, but he's apparently been dealing with Bob since he himself was a kid. So for him, I don't think that the line is clear. I wouldn't believe that character has, like, a peace of mind outside of his possession where he's just totally blacks out, and to him everything is fine and dandy. His daughter is, you know, homecoming queen, and everything is fine. He has a nice job with the horns. No, I really get the sense that he is probably as tortured and traumatized and fractured by this whole thing, and that has like led to this character being completely and utterly just like a ball of all of these things that we're talking about, with not a lot of, like, logic or reason behind any of it. It's just this to him, his own, I guess, probably motivations are completely lost and muddied amongst this possession or this other side of himself that he must have had, like, a moment of realization about at some point during his life. So
yeah, perfect explanation. And the only thing I would add is that everything you just said and the ambiguous nature and all of that is absolutely true of Leland in here, and you can make all the same arguments about Sarah in the Return, basically, I think. Yep. So there's no clear through line to what's going on with Sarah. Is Bob the evil that men do and inhabited Leland and normally a good guy, or is this abuse? Like, if Bob came into him when he was a young kid, that also implies that he was abused as a young kid, sure, and that this abuse thing is a cycle and all of that stuff. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and this whole thing about him coming into her room and, you know, telling her he loves her and all this sort of thing very apologetically. It's just like you alluded to, Dylan. It's a classic abuser dynamic here. It's like, oh, well, he hits me, but I know he loves me, that type of thing, right? It's like very often you see victims of domestic abuse. It's like immediately after there's this moment of like intense guilt and self-flagellation. It's like, oh, I'm such a piece of shit, I'll never do it again, etc., etc. This is all just like a very, very classic recreation of that dynamic. So yeah, so later that night, Laura, there's a scene where she's sort of looking at this painting of the angels, a little bit of foreshadowing here, and I believe what happens is that she actually left the framed photo underneath the bushes when she ran out of the house, and it looks like she goes back and she gets it and she puts it on her wall. And when she falls asleep, she ends up in the photo, and this begins a really surreal and fascinating scene where Mrs. Chalfont is there and sort of waving Laura through this painting space, and this space is one that is going to be referenced later in The Return when Mr. C goes through the Dutchman's, and it has the exact same wallpaper, like that black floral style that we're going to see. And we also get some more Red Room stuff here. the man from another place / the arm. He does his whole "I am the arm and I sound like this" thing, classic, and also him taking the owl cave ring and holding it up to the camera, which is something I have as a T-shirt, which I really like. Yeah, and we get Cooper, of course, telling Laura, "Don't take the ring," and I guess I'll refer to the resident ring scholar Jeremiah as to what Cooper means when he tells Laura, "Don't take the ring." What do you think Cooper means by that exactly?
Well, this is like a classic Twin Peaks thing that can be interpreted 100 different ways.
Sure.
But my first video was about the ring specifically, and I kind of, at least me growing up, the first 20 years of being a fan, amongst other fans that I talked to anyway, was basically the idea that's like, well, the ring is obviously bad. That's like what, well, the ring is like, maybe it forces Bob to kill her or whatever. Like, the ring obviously comes from the Red Room. So Cooper, he's telling her not to take it because he thinks it's bad. And then, like, I just never really thought about it. And then, a few years back, I was like, I think he doesn't know what he's doing. So, and the missing piece is like, he's like, there's some extra footage of him here in the Red Room, and he's like, where am I? When can I leave? What's going on? And then the arm, picks up the ring and then he's like, "Oh, don't take the ring, Laura, don't take the ring." And I mean, I guess if she took the ring, she ends up with the ring anyway at the end of the show. So basically, I think that the Chalfont's giving her the picture, and the arm trying to give her the ring in the dream, and then Mike ending up giving her tossing the ring in the train car at the end. They're trying to get her to take it because that's the deal with Bob. So if she takes the ring and puts the ring on, then Bob can't possess her. He has to kill her, basically, I think. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much all I got. I think that Cooper, you could also take the angle like, well, Cooper does know what the ring is, and he knows that if she puts it on, that she's going to die. So his reaction is pure, and he's like, "Hey, oh my God, don't take the ring or you're going to be killed." But then you get into the whole like, well, this is kind of like a destiny thing too. And like Laura decides to die. Like, this is all kind of her choice and kind of meant to be. And like, if she doesn't take the ring, Cooper, then Bob goes into her. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, does he not see that or what? So the simplest way I think is just, he doesn't know where he's at or what he's doing or how long he's going to be stuck in there. And he sees Laura Palmer and the arms trying to give her the ring. And he's like, "Hey, don't take that. That's bad." Like, that's just his instinct talking to me. Cause it's not, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Like, it is bad. It's just, how would you react in a story like that? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you just,
right. It's like he sees the ring as, it's like the ring is of the Black Lodge, therefore it is bad in Cooper's mind, and he doesn't want Laura to take it because for that reason is what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, that tracks to me. I don't know. I was just this whole business with the ring and what it means for Laura to put on the ring versus letting Bob possess her, and how all these various forces feel about that. Cooper and Mike and the arm and all that has always been really interesting to me. So yeah, we get Laura. She sort of wakes up, quote unquote, from this. Not really. We're in sort of a dream within a dream situation here, and she's holding her left arm, which, I don't know, maybe you could say that it's gone numb, similar to how the waitress described what happened to Teresa Banks earlier in the film. And wouldn't you know it, Annie Blackburn is in her bed. And she tells Laura, "My name is Annie. I've been with Dale and Laura. The good Dale is in the lodge and he can't leave. Write it in your diary." And this is something that is going to get referenced again later in the return with the missing diary pages that Hawk finds and all that. And then Laura turns over and sees that Annie has disappeared and that the ring is now in her hand. And curiously enough, this is the moment at which Laura starts to really freak out. All the stuff before that she seemed to take in stride, but Annie no longer being there and the ring being literally in her possession seems to really freak her out for some reason. Yeah, and then we get some interesting stuff. So Laura, she's heading out the door and she turns around and she sees sort of a pseudo mirror image of herself in the photo opening the door in that black floral wallpaper room here. This we just watched Inland Empire and it sort of reminds me a little bit of the scene in there where Laura Dern is like watching herself on the movie screen a little bit. I don't know, just this idea that Lynch likes of blurring the lines between fiction and reality. This is like one of the first major instances that I can think of there. I'm sure there's probably other examples too, but this is like one of the first major instances of that I can think of.
Yeah, that's a good connection. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, totally.
This whole sequence is like, it's just like it's in the middle of the film, and it's very clearly like a dream sequence. But in a film like this, that doesn't stand out all that much. But I feel like this is one of the more surreal, and more like Inland Empire-esque scenes where it's not necessarily a given that any of this is happening chronologically or it's sort of following this sort of dream logic. But I mean, this whole thing you have to imagine is, this whole thing is a result of Mrs. Tremont giving Laura the framed photo, which we can, I guess, posit that this whole thing was just designed to give her the ring to, like Jeremiah, like you said, uphold the end of the Bob's end of the bargain. And if you look at what happens once Laura does take the ring and puts it on and is killed, is that Leland/Bob voluntarily, it seems, or maybe he's bound by some sort of contract or something, he goes to Glastonbury Grove and sort of prostrates himself in front of Mike in the arm in this. So it's like, it clearly seems that everything that those entities are doing is designed to get Bob back into the waiting room and to uphold his end of the deal. And all of this whole this little adventure that Laura goes on, you can almost see it as like she's wearing black the whole time, and she sees the image of herself in different looking, wearing this black gown, and then gets this ring, which we know as the viewers is sort of symbolic of her death, or maybe her escape from this abuse cycle, because we do know that she has a tendency towards abuse herself, which we see just in her sort of sociopathic behavior. But I think other than that, you guys have pretty much said it all.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfectly said. I agree with all of that.
Yep. So then Laura, she wakes up for real and she takes the photo off the wall and she flips it upside down. Like, that was a weird dream. I don't think I liked that very much. I think I'm just gonna not think about this photo for a little while here. And then we get just a brief scene here, our second and I believe last Shelley sighting, where Leo is sort of screaming at her. I don't know, it's like something about cleaning the floor, and he like grabs her and he slaps her on the back of the head, and it's just like another domestic abuse thing thrown in there for good measure, I guess. And Leo receives a call from Bobby talking about like how the football is gone. I don't know. All this sort of gets twisted in my mind a little bit. This whole like drug plot. But ultimately, it's like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but ultimately, like the important thing about it is that this is what leads Bobby to go up into the woods with Laura to meet the guy who I now know, thanks to Jeremiah, is the dude from Deer Meadow, and kill that guy and everything like that. That's the details escape me, and I don't think are particularly important. So let's see from here. Oh yeah, so Laura goes to the Roadhouse, and when she's here, we get a pretty cool log lady scene where the log lady sort of meets her, and I think she like puts her hand to Laura's head, right? It's like she puts her hand to her forehead. Is that what happens? Am I remembering that correctly?
Exact. Yeah, like she's checking her.
Right, yeah. And she says to her, "The tender bows of innocence burn first and the wind rises. Then all goodness is in jeopardy." Sort of like this reminds me honestly more of the log lady stuff from The Return than it does from the stuff in the original show. It's just a little bit more cryptic. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, totally.
Definitely. She speaks in poetry and riddles. It's like, more akin to her phone calls with Hawk.
Yeah, I think they, in the original show, I think, especially in the pilot, like, I think she was just going to be kind of a quirky character, and I think people responded to it. So basically, from the pilot moving forward, she becomes more and more like a mystic or a seer or a town, yes. Who knows
Prophet.
who knows? Yeah, right. So, there after the first season, then we got the Secret History or Secret Diary novel by Jennifer Lynch, and Log Lady's in that, and she definitely starts to take on more of a, I guess, spiritual side or whatever. And then, season 2, there's those moments with Major Briggs, and you realize that Margaret had been abducted as well. And, and so she's, the more the show goes on, you see that she's kind of in tune with a lot more. And then definitely by the time this movie rolls around and you had the book and 2 seasons of the show, definitely more cryptic and, iconic. And then I think, the Secret History book and The Return and all that 25 years later, everything, very poetic and has to do with time and space and the meaning of life and what this is all about. And you know what I mean?
Right.
So, I love it. I love this scene. It's great. It's a great scene in the missing pieces. It's not, I don't think she speaks, but there's the night that Laura dies, there's a cut of Log Lady in her house, like holding her log, and she's all scared. You guys recall that? I think it's just like a single shot.
It's very brief, yeah.
Yeah. But, I love the Log Lady. That's all I got.
Laura is here watching Julie Cruz sing Questions in a World of Blue. Beautiful song. There's a really gorgeous blue light that's draping Julie Cruz as she is performing this at the Roadhouse. Laura is watching. She's very emotional. This is like a thing with Lynch. This idea of having a really emotional or transportive experience while watching a live music performance. We see it again and again. It's like there's Frank Booth watching Dorothy in Blue Velvet. There's Betty and Rita at the Club Silencio. There's, of course, Cooper watching Julie Cruz in the original run. Just characters having this moment of self-reflection or transformation while watching a live performance. It's an interesting motif throughout Lynch's work, I think.
You forgot a big one, Nick. You forgot Renee bawling her eyes out to James Hurley in the Roadhouse.
Oh yes.
How could you forget that?
Yes, of course. I apologize to Renee, and more importantly, to the powerful musical stylings of James Hurley.
You better.
So yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And thinking about it, like, those are some of my favorite scenes in the entire Lynch filmography. Like, Betty and Rita at the Club Silencio is like probably like top 5 for me in terms of Lynch scenes, I would say. He tends to just stage all this stuff really beautifully and powerfully. So yeah, Laura is here and she's like meeting with some potential Johns, I guess you could say, some men to sleep with for money. And Donna follows her here, and I guess we should say, I think I might have forgot to mention there was like a brief scene here before this where Laura sort of tells Donna not to follow her and not to pay any mind as to what she's doing. And this is, as we discussed last episode, sort of Laura's way of trying to protect Donna from the darkness that she herself has gone into. And there's a scene here where Donna is really just following Laura's lead and kissing this guy and sort of showing that she can go toe to toe with whatever Laura's doing, and like, oh, like I'm a dangerous, sophisticated woman just like Laura Palmer, and which is all a ruse, of course. And Laura at first isn't happy about it, but then she's sort of like takes this defiant attitude towards it. Like, okay, Donna, like, you really want to do this, huh? Well, then let's do it. And then they go to the pink room, which, just another amazing scene. God, I love this. I love this so much. It's so nightmarish. I first of all, this song that plays here is just an absolute banger. I love this song. I could listen to this song on a loop, like, forever. It's so good.
It's so sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It rules.
Totally rules.
And just, freaking awesome song right here. And just combined with, like, the strobe lights and, like, the stripping and just the red hue over everything like that, it is just such a vibe. as the kids would say. It's a vibe. It's a mood. And, very strange dialogue here between Laura and Donna and Jacques and all them. It's like, we get Jacques saying, "I am the great Went," and Laura saying, "I am the muffin," which of course is a reference to another scene that was in the Missing Pieces, right, where she talks about being the muffin and all that.
Yeah, her and Donna have a combo.
Yeah, so this is really when we get an idea of just how deep Laura is into this whole dark underbelly of Twin Peaks here, when she is dancing with this man who sort of starts disrobing her, and it's like we don't really have an idea of just how deep Laura is in this world until we watch this happen right here. And I think Donna is like a little bit of an audience surrogate here, where she just sort of looks on shocked and realizes, like, oh no, Laura is in a completely different world from me right now. Like, she is in with stuff far darker than that of a typical high school girl, you know.
Yeah, it makes me think of the conversation between Cooper and Harry Truman, when Cooper tells Truman that Laura had a drug habit and that she was involved in prostitution, and Harry says something like, that can't be true. You didn't know Laura Palmer. So, like, from the outside perspective, all these things hinted at in the original run, it's like there's almost like an air of like, you can't, like, that it can't be true. Like, it's completely unbelievable. But then you witness it firsthand here, and like you said, Donna is sort of the surrogate for that. Where I find it interesting too that before she walks over to the table, it looks like she's wiping some tears away from her eyes. So, like, even though she seems to be like playing ball with this whole thing, she's at the same time recognizes that there's, like you said, a complete and utter, like, unrecognizable darkness to what Laura is up to. Yet still voluntarily, Donna involves herself in it, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even without any kind of context of the diary or any of the background information that people might have had, the first time you see this, like, yeah, definitely this is the scene that's totally clear that, this reminds me of the conversation they had on the couch, falling through space and bursting into flames, because everything's red, and there's the holes in the ceiling and the lights coming down through the holes, and then there's the strobe lights, and this is Donna and Laura at the, kind of towards the, further along in the movie, and their situation's totally changed, obviously, and there's something I never noticed before, but Donna, they actually drug her beer. I always kind of forget that. Like, there's a little quick shot.
Yep.
But yeah, the music, Donna's realization of how far gone Laura is, and then Laura's flip realization that she doesn't want Donna to have any part in this. This is like one of the most memorable Lynch scenes of all time, no question. You guys want to know something really weird? So again, this was the first thing that I saw when I was 14 or whatever was this movie, as far as Twin Peaks, and so I'm totally out of context. Totally don't know what's going on. Don't know Jeffries. Don't know Cooper. Just trying to put it all together. So I don't know if it's the first run, one of the runs of the Fire Walk With Me home video release, either for rental or I believe, but this scene had no subtitles. So when I first saw this scene, it was just insanely loud, and I kept turning it up to hear well, they're obviously saying stuff. So I tried to what are they saying? So anyway, it was bizarre. It was one of the most bizarre movie viewings of all I've ever had.
Yeah, and then you watch the one with the subtitles, and it's like, I am the Great Went. I am the Muffin. I'm as blank as a fart. And you're just like, oh, maybe I wasn't missing valuable information here. Yeah, there is a version floating out there that doesn't have subtitles, not just in this scene, but also in the Red Room stuff as well.
Wow.
and pretty much always the Red Room stuff has subtitles to help people out with the backwards speaking and stuff, but I have seen a version like you're discussing that doesn't have the subtitles here or in the Red Room, which is a challenging experience, I'm sure. I think that probably the only significant dialogue that happens here from a plot perspective is this bit that Jacques says where he tells Ronette and Laura that Teresa had called him asking what Laura and Ronette's fathers look like. And that apparently she was sort of planning on blackmailing Leland. Which is an interesting recall. It, I guess, might give us some additional motivation for Leland killing Teresa Banks.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what this is. Because other than that, there's no other practical reason that he murders her. I don't know. And I also am not certain what exactly. Was there a similar deal in place between with Bob and Teresa Banks, like there is with Bob and Laura? How did she get the ring? And why was she killed? I don't know. This is at least a sound motivation from Leland's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Leland, the actual human being Leland, not just Bob Leland.
Yes.
It's more of this muddying of the waters.
Yeah, and it totally just keeps continues to muddy the waters as to how much of Leland is Bob, et cetera, et cetera. So if all of that's true, then that means that Leland acted totally alone, and this is totally a reaction of the blackmail, and all that blackmail stuff is fleshed out more in the missing pieces. By the way, there's an extra like 5 minutes of the motel scene and the but it gets the job
looking
done
through the ads and whatnot.
Yeah. So so if all that's true, then Leland killed Teresa Banks out of the sake of protecting Leland. But then you get the impression that the other lodge beings are mad because they haven't got the Garmin Bozia right. But then Teresa Banks wore the ring according to the autopsy. She had a ring. She had a ring on in her hand. So it's like, when did she have the ring? If she was wearing the ring and Leland killed her and Bob killed her and she had the ring on, just like Laura, then wouldn't that have fed the lodge beings? And why would they be all pissed off at him about, well, you need to kill Laura. You need to kill Laura because you owe us cream corn. And it's like, well, if Teresa Banks had the ring and he killed her, even if it was out of personal reasons, then wouldn't her spirit gone, like, wouldn't have he given them? So I don't know. Who knows? That's where this all. This is where, for me,
maybe there's just something. Maybe there's just something. Yeah, sure. Maybe there's just something specifically about Laura that they want. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, right. Which that feeds into the can get into the return stuff too. But obviously that wasn't in mind at the time. I mean, at the time it's like I'm basically just thinking too much about it. But she sees Leland coming out of the house. That's her first kind of clue. And then this is kind of like her second clue. Like, wait a minute, why would you be asking about my dad? And she ended up dead. And so obviously that when she comes out screaming and out of the diary pages and then Leland walks out, I mean, that's a pretty freaking obvious clue. But but basically she's still not 100%. But the way I view this movie, she's not 100% till she sees him in bed.
Yeah.
Right. And then
exactly.
there's
Like
the scream, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
she thinks she knows, but there's probably just like that like 1% kernel of her that is in denial about the fact that her father is the one that's molesting her. So
yes. And then this pink room scene is the next clue, which again was totally lost on me because I couldn't hear it. And even with the subtitles, it's just kind of like, what about the father and blackmail? That's weird. Because without the missing piece, pieces,
don't forget about. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Just without the missing pieces, kind of fleshing this out. Like, I never picked up on the Teresa might be a dog. I don't know. For some reason, that never stuck out in my mind till the missing pieces and everything kind of was like, oh, okay, I got you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so Donna is getting into stuff too, and Laura sees Donna drunk and topless on a table, and there's some dude draped over her, and Laura snaps into action immediately and runs over to help Donna and cover her up and like drag her out of there. And the next morning, Donna doesn't seem to have much memory of what happened. At the very least, she doesn't remember how she got home. We don't really know how much of the night Donna remembers, but she doesn't really seem to remember Laura springing into action and helping her and all that. It's at this moment that Leland walks in, and we get a small flashback of the motel material that we were alluding to with Laura and Ronette and all that sort of stuff. It's a very brief flashback. And that scene leads...
Which is...
Sorry, go ahead.
That's just one real quick.
Yeah.
That's just like another because that he has that same flashback later where he's like, he's going to meet Teresa and then he sees Laura and Ronette. That's Leland. Like, that's not Bob. Like,
Yeah.
So Leland understands that his daughter is involved in prostitution and his daughter is in the same ring as this woman that this prostitute that he's seeing. So just another incriminating bit for Leland.
Yep. This is 100% Leland right here. So that leads into an absolutely amazing scene here of Mike rolling up and confronting Leland at Laura at this intersection, which is the same intersection that Richard runs over the kid in The Return, interestingly enough.
Yep.
And god damn, I just love how insane this scene is here. Mike rolls up, he's wearing the owl cave ring as a pinky ring, and he's waving it at Laura and Leland, and he screams this dialogue that, again, is very difficult to make out because we are just in the midst of this absolute insane cacophony of, like, engines revving and dogs barking. There's like a really weird couple shots just to a dog and like Leland and Laura are both like and Mike are all just like shouting at the top of their lungs, and it's just so fucking insane. I love it. And Mike is saying, okay, I have the quote here. He says, "You stole the corn. I had it canned over the store. And miss, the look on her face when it was opened, there was a stillness, like the Formica tabletop. The thread will be torn, Mr. Palmer. The thread will be torn." And then he tells Laura, "It's him. It's your father." And, boy, yeah, I just... Aside from all the obvious, implications of, this deal, quote-unquote, that Mike and the other lodge entities have with Leland and Bob and the canned corn and all that, I just love the absolutely chaotic energy of this scene here. It's really remarkable, just the way that it's edited together, and the completely just the enormous racket of this scene I really enjoy.
The ambition of David Lynch to really take volume to an uncomfortable level as an artistic choice is among my favorites of his, just because it puts you on edge in a way that's like, it's like hearing a baby cry kind of like springs you into action, just like innately, like it triggers something in your brain. Like very loud cacophony does something to you psychologically and changes how you view a certain scene or how you interpret it. So his use of just like the incredible like hum of machinery and just like the screeching of the tires and the screaming of the engine. I think Laura even mentions, is like, "Do you smell that? It smells like your engine's on fire," kind of like a scorched engine oil type reference. But it really, it's his willingness to like go beyond what might be comfortable for the viewer and intentionally put in like just I've watched this movie like late at night, and this scene comes on and I gotta like turn the volume down like 10 or 15 notches just to not wake up all my neighbors, because it just like goes from this quiet scene of them sitting in a living room having a little chat to all of a sudden there's just friggin' just machinery and screaming and all kinds of crazy shit. So, but it's a real testament to Lynch's willingness to place the viewer outside of their comfort zone and kind of like assault your senses as an attempt to probe you and prime you for like the artistic purpose of a scene like this.
Yeah, agreed. It's one of my favorite scenes of all time, probably. It's completely bananas, like you said, and yeah, it's the same. So you got The Return, you got another road rage incident at this intersection. The this is where it just kind of absurd. Like the guy is literally screaming like it's your father, but like
Yeah.
but like
Right.
we don't know it yet. I mean, we know it, I guess, but like the noise and the calamity and all that, and so Laura still doesn't get it, right? So this is like another clue, and it's like obvious, and I think it's just another kind of subtle comment maybe on the abuse in the family situation, like there'll be certain signs that it's like literally screaming in your face that like something's wrong, but people still don't maybe not react to it right. I don't know. Who knows? But
yeah, exactly.
But I love this scene,
Right.
and Mike is great. And yeah, you read the subtitles, and so yeah, I saw this movie like 10 times, and then it was like when I got a version that had subtitles, like, oh shit, this is all about cream corn. They're fighting over freaking cream corn. Okay, I get it's funny. It's like when you watch this movie with subtitles, like so much more things click. So it's like this movie makes no sense, but watch it with subtitles and watch the hour and a half of extra footage, and then maybe you'll like start to figure it out what the hell's going on.
Hell yeah. Yeah, and I'll just say also, like, this is definitely my favorite Al Strobel moment probably in the history of Twin Peaks. Like, he is just absolutely unhinged here. Like, the way that he is just screaming and waving his pinky around, it's like whoa.
Oh yeah.
This is like Mike's shining moment, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no question. I just he gets it's unfortunate because it seems like in the original show he gets the good, he gets to say "Fire Walk with Me" poem, and he gets some. It seems like his moments are more, I don't know, like relevant to the plot or whatever. Where this one is just kind of, but it's definitely like my favorite Mike moment. You're just like, yeah, get him.
Yeah. It's very peripheral, and apparently all of this stuff with him throwing the ring into the train car was sort of an afterthought.
Yeah.
From what I've read, like all that stuff was shot like supposedly way after all that train car stuff was shot. Right? Have you heard that as well?
Yeah, I heard that. Too. So I don't know if it's just a shot of the ring hitting the floor, or if it's all of it with her hand and you actually see her putting it on. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's one thing if it's
right.
Like, well, we need to make this to make sense, so we got to have him do the ring thing. So let's go back and shoot some additional. But it's another thing if it's like,
yes,
well,
it all makes sense now that they added that. Now it's
right.
totally crystal clear.
right, exactly. So, you never. I don't know. I don't know if it was like, well, we have to. She's got to put the ring on at the end for this to make sense, and they shot all of that, or if it's just like, oh shit, we don't have any shot of the ring like entering the train car, so maybe we need to go back and do that one shot. So I don't know. I haven't actually, but I did hear that that was added later.
Right. Yep. Yeah, so then we get a flashback, basically what we were alluding to before, of Leland with Teresa Banks. They're in bed together, and he says, he basically says that he'd be willing to party with the girls that she told him about, unaware that one of those girls is his daughter. And there's a pretty creepy and sinister moment here where he covers her eyes with his hands and asks her who he is, and she says, "I don't know," and he's like, "That's right," which is just, oy, Leland.
Again, that seems to be Leland,
Yeah.
and not Bob.
Yeah. Yeah. Just sleeping with teenage girls. That's what Leland's all about. So yeah, and we skip ahead a little bit, and he sees Ronette and Laura through an open door, and he freaks out, and he pays Teresa, and he's like, oh yeah, I chickened out, and then he leaves. And as he's leaving, we see the boy in the mask jumping behind him. Yeah, I don't really know what to make of that.
Yeah, I think that's just I don't know, like, I think it maybe just showing the connection between Bob/Leland and that he's being followed by these entities that are all just sort of keeping tabs on him and making sure he upholds his end of the bargain.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So then, we get this scene of Laura accompanying Bobby to the woods where they are going to score some cocaine from this Deer Meadow policeman. And he shows up with the cocaine and he pulls a gun out and tries to kill them. Bobby pulls out a gun first and shoots him several times, including one last shot in the head, so that we know he's dead. And Laura is apparently so just like high and drunk out of her mind that she doesn't really know how to process this information and just starts cracking up. And Bobby is very disturbed by this. He's like, it's not fucking funny. He's flipping out because now he has a dead body on his hands. And this is like we're just, I know it's like, it seems like an obvious point. We are just spiraling ever further down the rabbit hole with Laura. Like, she seems almost at this point like she's disconnecting from reality. Like, she's not even engaging with what's in front of her in a meaningful way, and is instead just choosing to completely dissociate with drugs. And she's going to be similarly unhinged later, in a little bit with James when she goes out and meets him in the woods as well.
Yeah, dissociate's the word I would use. She is completely detached from any semblance of meaning of what's happening. Like, you know, someone just got murdered in front of her, and she not only does she not care, she's kind of making a joke out of it and trolling Bobby and telling him that he shot Mike. And she knows that this is going to piss him off, and every time she says it, she kind of laughs through it. It's this, like you said, this unraveling of her and this downward spiral that she could see someone murdered right in front of her, and it won't wake her up from this. She's so far gone.
Yeah, so Bobby kills a guy, which is pretty crazy, because now we have the knowledge that the Bobby that we see throughout the original run and in the return is somebody who has shot a man to death, which feels like it gets lost in the shuffle sometimes. Yeah. But it feels like an important part of Bobby's character that he did, in fact, kill a guy on a drug deal gone wrong, which is like, I don't know, kind of mind-blowing. And like I mentioned in our episode about part 17 of The Return, like, there's that whole scene in black and white where Laura is talking to James, and they chose to leave that part in where she mentions, like, Bobby killed a guy. And James is just like, what? And I always just, I fixate on that a little bit, because it's like, it's like the show sort of reminding us that there's this other layer to Bobby that, you know, even though he's now this allegedly reformed, upstanding young policeman, he does have this dark past. I always just thought it was interesting that they chose to keep that piece of information in at such a pivotal moment in the season.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, he killed a sheriff's deputy, and that's exactly what he becomes. He becomes a sheriff's deputy who used to deal drugs, just like the sheriff's deputy who did deal drugs. So it's just like an interesting little parallel, and could maybe provide some insight into his experience with the sick girl and the screaming woman, or was that some sort of, I don't know, just if that was a dream sequence, was it maybe brought upon by this underlying guilt that he must have from that, like, his own traumatic experience of shooting and killing someone who he, by all accounts, did not intend to shoot and kill up until guns were drawn. Like, I don't think he went into that moment, like, prepared to murder anyone. And it's sort of interesting that we explore so many other characters' traumas very in depth, and then something like that, which would definitely imprint heavily on a young man, we don't overtly see it really referenced that much.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's about all I can say about that. I mean, it is an interesting choice, and I mean, I thought when I saw Bobby in The Return as a deputy, like, I really thought they were going to revisit that, and then it was like, okay, well, they're not going to revisit that. And then, of course, in the end of The Return, they go back in time and they show that clip one more time, like, oh, Bobby killed a guy. It's like, yeah, it's just one of those things, like, he's got a dark secret too, like everybody else, apparently. So, but yeah, it's super interesting. And and by the way, the account of him killing somebody in the Secret Diary novel is different. So
Yes.
Bobby did kill somebody, but it is during a drug deal, but it's not this Cliff Howard guy, and it's this how that all goes down is different. But at the end,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just at the end of the day, all anybody really needs to retain is that, you know, Bobby, in a drug deal back when he was a teenager, someone ended up getting shot, and it was his fault. So
we flash forward to the next day, and James shows up at the Palmer house, and she goes out to meet him, and it looks like, just based on her general appearance, like she's been up all night doing cocaine and possibly crying a lot. And Leland is sort of standing ominously in the threshold there of the door and watching them, and Laura sort of makes eyes to the side as if like, hey, I have to go back inside, and the reason is because my fucking psychotic dad doesn't want me out here talking to boys, you know?
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we go back with Laura inside the house. She's just doing more coke by her bedside very casually. And yeah, this is the whole start of the quote-unquote ritual that we alluded to before, where Leland gives Sarah the milk and makes sure that she drinks the whole thing, which is very creepy. Like, she drinks it and she gets all the way there, but then he just sort of like stands over her until she completely drinks the whole glass. The ceiling fan turns on, and Sarah sees the white horse in her room and passes out. And then we get probably the most upsetting scene of the movie. In fact, I would say definitely the most upsetting scene in the movie, where Bob enters through the window. There's a weird, mysterious, like, strobe light going on, as Lynch's want to do. Some sort of flashing. It almost looks like lightning or something, but like extremely rapid. And we hear the sound of the ceiling fan. Otherwise, it's completely silent. And Bob slinks in through the window and makes his way onto Laura's bed, and he's like sort of just like running his face all over her body. And, you know, anytime I watch this, I always just think about what it must have been like for Frank Silva to play this character. I don't think that gets talked about a whole lot, but I can imagine that this must have been a very I struggle to use the word brave when it comes to actors, but like when people see Frank Silva's face now, they think rape. Like his face is synonymous with scenes like this, and and Frank Silva was by all accounts like a very kind man, and as we all know, he was like a set dresser for the show that ended up becoming a big part of the mythology through some pretty obscure means. But I just want to give just a word of appreciation and understanding to the late Frank Silva for taking on this role and being as terrifying as Lynch obviously wanted him to be.
Yeah, it is kind of, it's a thought to have of like, what if you went to work one day and your boss was just like, hey, you know what you'd be great for in this current outfit that you're wearing and the way your hair is, like, you would be a great serial rapist in this movie. And just to go along with that and wear that same outfit every time. And yeah, kind of an interesting little just, I wonder what that conversation was like. I'm sure it wasn't that. I'm sure it was more like, hey, I need you to stand here and behind this couch and kind of look a certain way. And it snowballed into the character of Bob. But yeah, like that, ostensibly, like that getup was just what he was wearing to work that day. And that just sort of became him, that like weird Canadian tuxedo thing that he's wearing. And yeah, just like anytime an actor portrays like a truly horrific person, kudos for being able to do that while not being that. It blows my mind as someone who just really has no idea about acting or what goes into it or what it must be like. But yeah, those actors like Frank Silva, who by all accounts are great people, who have this way of portraying a real darkness and a real evil. It's kind of mesmerizing.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. He was great and iconic, and yeah, the story of how all that went down is just hilarious. But yeah, apparently he was a super nice guy, and I'm not saying that this stuff was easy, but I mean, Sheryl Lee like pretty much goes through hell this whole movie. Like, I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it was awful. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Everyone's like, yeah, it was awful, but David's really good at making everyone comfortable, and it's, so it's, it's not that this stuff is easy, but I guess he makes it, he's a good director and likes, makes it as easy as he can,
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sure that it wasn't like, Frank Silva wasn't made to feel like a rapist on set or anything like that. But like I said, just to have your face forever associated with this, especially when it's like your one role that you ever played. Yeah. It's kind of a it's kind of a raw deal, but regardless, yeah, this scene is completely horrifying. Sheryl Lee doing some real work here. Bob's face flashes to Leland, and that's the moment that she, accepts once and for all that Bob is in fact her father. They're one and the same.
Yeah.
In her mind.
And
you get the scream.
Yeah. Yeah, the scream.
The scream, which actually it doubles. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but she screams, and then there is this doubling of that, which I always found really fascinating, and almost read it as like this is her actual fracture point. This is where the Lara that is the Lara that can do good and the Lara that can do evil really gets just broken, or her personality splits in that way that trauma victims tend to do. Just really it's just a real, just the sound of it gets to you. It gets to me. It really does every time.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then this is the, and then after this, yeah, exactly. This is the moment that she accepts everything and sees things for how they are. And then from this moment out is kind of like the third act, sort of. From here, this is the turning point where she starts, however you want to look at it, accepting her fate or realizing how this is going to end, or,
Mm-hmm. that there's really no way out of this situation, I think is what she realizes. It's like she's trapped in this house with this maniac who's abusing her, and there's just no light at the end of the tunnel for her, really. I think she gets that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you could maybe make the case that she knows that it's either continue like this or die, and that she's sort of grappling with that concept, and has completely, like you said, there's no hope. All hope is lost, and now it's just this rock in this hard place, and she's dealing with that.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and just one more thing about this absolutely demonic shot of Leland's face here. Like the absolute most terrifying shot of Leland Palmer.
It's awful.
Yeah. And the next day, Laura and Leland are sitting together at the table, and Laura is just completely inconsolable. She is like shaking and sort of fiddling with her cereal, and Leland is just sort of like, well, what's wrong? You know, like acting very oblivious. He follows her up to her room, and Laura, with an absolutely incredible line reading from Cheryl Lee, just sort of stares at him and says, "Stay away from me." And yeah, from there we get this scene with Laura and Bobby on the couch, which is a scene that is elaborated upon a little bit in the Missing Pieces, where she's essentially just asking him for cocaine. Like, she wants coke, and Bobby is a little bit hurt by this. He gets the sense from her that she's just, at this point, she's strictly using him as like a connect for cocaine. And then she sneaks out of her house to meet James, and Leland sees her through the window, and this is all the stuff that gets reincorporated into The Return. And, you know, again, it's just amazing how differently all this stuff feels in The Return, you know, in black and white with none of the music happening whatsoever. I know that we talked about that quite a bit in our episode about Part 17, but it just really is an interesting test case for how, like, the same footage in a different context just can feel so differently. So yeah, we all know what happens here. Laura is just really manic with James here. James really has no idea what's going on. He is like way over his head here in this situation. And she is, you know, verbally abusive towards him. Also physically, she like slaps him and gives him the finger, and then just completely turns on a dime on him and says, like, let's get lost together. Like, she is just veering from one end of the spectrum to the other at this point. Like, she is just careening towards death at this point. And, yeah, and then she sees something behind James and screams. And we find out in The Return that thing is, in fact, Agent Cooper from the future, who has come back to, quote-unquote, save her. And, yeah, this is just... I think you know, my reading before The Return on this was always just that, like, she was, like, so crazy out of her mind on drugs that she's, like, hallucinating, like, dark figures in the forest and whatnot. But it was a pretty clever twist that they intimated that Cooper was the thing that she saw behind James.
Yeah, that's one of the most... that's one of the biggest, like, jaw drop moments I've had watching anything, was watching The Return Part 17 and realizing that, oh my god, that's what she's screaming at. She was screaming at Cooper the whole time. And I think maybe we could have the conversation of, well, is that still Cooper there in this time in the version of this scene where she actually does die at the end? But
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if it is. But I feel comfortable.
I don't think it actually makes sense, but I still like it anyways.
I don't think it does either, and I don't think that was the original purpose of this scene. I don't know. Or the screen. I scream. I really don't know, but I don't think so. I don't get the sense that it was. But I think it was, like you said, a very clever addition much later to throw Cooper in there. Although it is interesting that he shows up there, but then they get back on James's bike and ride to Sparkwood in 21, and I don't know how far that is. Did Cooper walk there? What happened? How did he? I don't know. But yeah, one of those really watching this scene now, having watched The Return, it just gives you the goosebumps every time she looks away and screams oh, there's Cooper's somewhere off screen being creepy in the woods.
Yeah. There's also, I think it's her manic state and her being on drugs, and also around this, somewhere in this speech, she says something like, he'll get to you too, or he knows about you, or he doesn't know about you, or so I think it's just the evil in the woods, or the fact that Bob and these beings are closing in on her, and it's just her freak out moment. And then of course, then in The Return they work that in, which is pretty brilliant. But then, like you said, it doesn't. So if it is Cooper there, right, then she doesn't get killed because he saves her, right? But
right, yeah.
But then this one, the version's different. Obviously, it's in color in the original one, and there's music. And then in The Return, it's edited. I believe it's edited just slightly different, and it's in black and white, and there's no music.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, great scene. And this is referenced in if not the pilot, the first or second episode, James being interrogated, she jumped off the bike at Sparkwood in 21, and she screamed she loved me, and I'd never seen her like this before, and she was out of her mind. And, so this is kind of bringing it all home again for the pilot, lining things up with the pilot and everything.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think it makes sense that she actually saw Laura, or she actually saw Cooper in this timeline, but again, I just think it's kind of to me it's just neat that they did it anyways. I'm not going to break my brain trying to make it make perfect sense. It's fine. Laura, she jumps off James's bike and runs away. We get the famous "I love you, James," and she meets with Jacques, Leo, and Ronette out there in the woods. And we see Jacques tying Laura up against her will. She doesn't want to be tied up, but he does it anyways. And at this point, we see Leland show up through the window of the cabin that they're in. He knocks Jacques out as Jacques is exiting the cabin, which, I don't know, there's always a little bit of comedy for me in the fact that Leland is dressed at his most dad-like, in his most dad-like fashion. He's wearing this sweater vest getup, and he's just kicking the shit out of Jacques. Perhaps not the most entirely believable thing that Leland could just physically overpower a man of Jacques' size, but what are you gonna do?
He trips him like it's a cartoon. He just sticks his foot out in front of the door, and he's whoa, and tumbles over.
Yeah, and then he just starts
kicking him in the head.
Yeah, exactly. Then we just get an absolutely horrific series of scenes here wherein Leland and Laura are just screaming at each other, face to face. She is just absolutely horrified by his presence there. She knows who he is. She knows what's probably about to happen to her. And we get some pretty amazing shots of Leland leading Laura and Ronette through the forest here. I love this. This is so goddamn creepy, and it has one of Lynch's favorite devices that we mention again and again, which is just like a spotlight of indeterminate origin. Like like he's leading them through the woods. They're crying, they're screaming. He has this totally maniacal look on his face, and there's just like this weird like flashlight effect that is on them that just gives it a real level of surreality to it. And I don't know, it's like they get to the train car, and it sounds to me like the ceiling fan sound is happening throughout this scene. There's just like some sort of like whoosh, 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 whoosh happening throughout the entirety of it.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura sees Bob in her own reflection in the mirror, which is like a bit of foreshadowing as to like what they're planning to do here, like this sort of body jump that that could potentially take place. Leland produces the diary pages, and he says to her, "I always thought you knew it was me." Which I don't know, like, is that supposed to, I don't know, like, does her knowing it was him make it better? I don't know. I don't really understand why Leland would say that.
I think it.
I don't know. I don't even know if that's Leland or if that's Bob at that point, or if it matters.
Right. But it's like,
yeah, you can look at. I think you can chalk that up to kind of what you were saying before about the when he starts crying and goes into Laura's room and I'm sorry, and it's like abuser excuses. You know what I mean? Like I think this is it's just another line of like, well, hey, like I don't know, like I do really love you, or I thought you knew it was me the whole time and you were okay with it, and now you're not okay with it. Like what's the deal? I mean, it's a creepy and awful, and again, like keep blurring that line between Leland and Bob, and what's really going on. But yeah, that line was always.
That's a good point. I never really thought about that. That like maybe he was saying like, because we know that supposedly like he's been molesting her since she was 12,
right?
And so that's his way of saying like, oh well, I thought you were cool with it or something, or like maybe implying, or maybe you were like implying some level of consent, which is like incredibly sick.
Oh, right. So this line always got to me. This line did. Yeah,
you're right. I never really I never put it together in that way. But yeah, that's really good. Then, curiously, Ronette sees an angel standing next to her, and her ropes are seemingly magically cut, and she's able to escape briefly. And this is the intercut with all this is Mike running towards the train car with the alcove ring in tow. He reaches in, throws the ring into the train car. Laura puts on the ring. And, I think there's a line here from Leland where he says, don't make me do this, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, the way that this is depicted, her actual murder is really, really something. We just get, like, these impressionistic flashes of like her bloody mouth and the knife stabbing downwards, like from her point of view, like shots of Leland taking the necklace, and all of this is sort of represented in flashes. It's like it's all happening really fast, and it's really chaotic, and it's really dramatic. We've got this pretty atypical music happening during all this. It's like this dissonant choir music that's happening here that I don't think we ever see again from Twin Peaks, and that I don't really associate with Lynch in general. Like I think this is the one time we hear something like this. It just like adds this level of really dark grandeur to this scene, I think. And yeah, so Leland, he takes her and he wraps her in plastic, and we get just that really brief, chilling shot of him as Bob seen through the plastic. So yeah, I mean, do you guys have any comments on the, like, just the way that this scene here is represented? You know, because like the actual killing of Laura Palmer is like a pretty big moment in the history of the series, and I think the way that it's shown here is like appropriately horrifying.
Yeah, it's something that, like, how do you, not only have you known that everyone knows that Laura Palmer dies, who is, well, most of us who watched the show before, most people watching this knew Laura was going to die. So, like, how do you make that moment, that people, not only have they known it was coming for whatever 2.5 hours, but you also know that it's, you know, you've known that for years if you watch the show. So how do you make it have like this how do you make it feel, look, and sound important? And I think that Lynch really nailed it here with this choir. And I think that it's not simply this like choir. There's also like kind of like low dissonant drone underneath it that blends with it, like the low end of it so well that it just like, it really grounds the whole scene. And, you know, the depiction of it is so frazzled, and it's achieved through shots that are force you to sort of put the full picture together in your own head, which I think is much more disturbing than like maybe like a literal depiction of it. Even though this is a literal murder and we are seeing that, it's like broken up in a way that is making us sort of use our imagination to fill in the blanks, which is something that happens all the time with Twin Peaks and Lynch in general. So the use of sound and the use of the visuals, and then just this being juxtaposed to Ronette seeing the angel, I think is really powerful, because you see someone saved in some way, and then you see someone sacrificed, and back to back, and it really sort of like, I think that added a little bit to the gravity of her murder. And I don't know what Ronette was saying. That my subtitles gave me nothing for that, and I've rewinded it a bunch of times. I could make out certain words. It sounds like she says father, or like, I don't know if she's like praying or what, but I can't make out what Ronette's saying before that angel pops up. But either way, I thought that it really combined with all of the things that go into like the literal depiction of the murder, just gave so much more of a weight to this character who you, by all accounts, knew was going to die, and she even maybe knew she was going to die. And seeing that depicted in such a way is really, it's really heartbreaking, is what it is.
Yeah, totally. I had the same, it's funny you brought that up, because that's exactly how I remember seeing this for the first time, and that the death scene, and in my mind, like, I was just completely mind fried at that point. And I remember the murder itself really stuck with me as like, you know, something, you know, really, really brutal. And that might have been the most brutal thing that I've had seen up to that point, maybe, or, you know, I just remember being like totally shook by it. And then it wasn't till, and and that kind of stayed with me after a few viewings, but it wasn't until like I got it on DVD or, you know, years later, like, yeah, totally. There's nothing going on. Everything cuts to black. You don't even see a knife or a hammer or whatever it is. It's the psycho thing, the shower scene, right? Like it's basically all in your mind. You don't actually see a knife touching skin, and it's the same kind of thing. Like you just get these flashes and the music and the context, and everything was like, wow, like, no, most of this is in my head. You know, the reason I'm so disturbed is because it's in my head. And, yeah, as far as Ronette goes, I'm in the same boat. Don't know what she says. I assume it's a prayer. it feels like she's kind of got a rhythm to it. And she does just say, she says something about the father and the something or whatever. I just assume that she assumes she's going to be killed next. So she's just saying a prayer, and then ironically that angel shows up. So
Leland takes Laura's body out of the car, wrapped in plastic. He sees Ronette laying there, assumes that she's dead, and goes and dumps Laura's body in the water. And from there, Leland, like we alluded to before, approaches Glastonbury Grove and goes into the lodge, and we get that very brief shot of him in the black and white makeup that we saw Laura in earlier when she was talking to Harold. Also very reminiscent of a moment with Wyndham Earle from season 2. And once Leland enters the lodge, he meets with Mike and the Arm, who are just sort of, looks like they've just been waiting there for him. And he does this really weird move where he just leans forward really far, like Michael Jackson in the Smooth Criminal video.
Yep. Exactly like that.
Impossible not to think about. And then he floats up in the air, sort of separate from Mike, or for Bob rather. Like Bob is just sort of standing nearby as Leland floats in the air. Mike and the Arm, they demand their Garmonbosia simultaneously from Bob, and then Bob does this really striking move where he touches Leland's abdomen that is like covered in blood and transfers it into his hand, and then does this move where it's like he throws the blood down on the floor. And this shot of Bob, his arm extended with the blood flowing across the Red Room floor, is one of my favorites. I love it. It's part of the it's one of the images that they included in the Criterion package for this film, and I really appreciated that because it just looks badass. And then we get a pretty gross shot of the Arm, like, just sipping gingerly on the creamed corn. And then a close-up shot of the monkey behind a mask. And I think for a long time there was a misconception that the monkey was saying Judy, but I don't think that's actually the case. I think somebody came out and corrected that. Right?
What's it saying? It says Judy on the one that I watched.
No, so the I believe the controversy is that it does say Judy. One of the incarnations, either the Blu-ray box set or I'm not sure. I think this is corrected on the Criterion, but one version at some point said Judy, and then in parentheses, Philip Jeffries' voice, and
right, I remember that. Yeah.
Someone asked Sabrina Sutherland if that is Philip Jeffries' voice, and she said no, I guess. So that's all I know. I always assumed it was Philip Jeffries' voice because he's the one that brought up Judy in the first place, and that always led me to believe that he might have been the monkey, or that's his voice coming from that other side. Like he's still, he's among them as opposed to the real world type thing. Mm-hmm. But then she's like, no, that's not Philip Jeffries' voice. That's just the monkey supposed to be saying it. Something like that. So the monkey does say Judy, but you are not supposed to think that it's Philip Jeffries. But I totally think it's Philip Jeffries for the in my head, yeah. In my head canon or whatever, it is Philip Jeffries, or that's at least a reference back to the beginning of the movie, kind of trying to more or less put a But again, we had no idea what Judy was. You know, I just always thought it was a throwback to the beginning of the movie, and that, you know, Philip Jeffries, I've been to one of their meetings, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, so this is a shot of maybe because Jeffries is bouncing around in and out of time and this and that. Maybe he's taken a new form. Maybe he is the monkey thing. So
yeah.
I don't think I'm
I love the idea of Jeffries being the monkey so much that I'm just willing to believe anything.
Right.
Like, that is.
Let's go with
Yes,
that one. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of the Philip Jeffries is the monkey theory. So I don't care what Sabrina Sutherland says. I'm just gonna roll with that because why not?
Right. Yeah.
Listen, if he can become a fucking like a steam kettle or whatever, he can be a monkey. All right.
Right.
You can't tell me otherwise.
Before he was a teapot, he was a monkey. So what's the problem? What's the problem here?
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Prove me wrong.
Before that, he was David Bowie.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we get one of my favorite endings in the history of cinema. I gotta be honest here. Laura with Cooper, his hand on her shoulder. The angels nearby looking on. Sheryl Lee's performance here is just all-time great, in my opinion. Just these tears of, I guess what you could read as joy or relief. You know, her pain has ended. You know, she's no longer being threatened by Bob. You know, she's here with Cooper, who is by her side. She's under the protection of the angels. You know, she isn't, you know, all coked out and disheveled. You know, she looks really beautiful, and her hair is done, and her makeup is done. And I find this ending, you know, if this had been the ending, you know, for all time with Twin Peaks, I would have been totally happy with that, because I think it is just incredibly, I think it's incredibly affecting and brilliant.
Yeah, it is in a lot of ways. It's more of an ending, like it ends. It ends mysteriously, but it ends. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really leave much thought of what happens next. It's like, what happens next? Well, Twin Peaks season 1 happens next. So it's like the thing, the cliffhanger from season 2 still remains. But as far as like an ending goes, yeah, this is a real fitting one. And I've really gone back and forth on you know what the meaning of this ending is. And I mean meaning in the sense of like, what is the emotional meaning? Not like a literal meaning, like right. Not literally what happened, but what's the emotional gravity of the tears and the joy in the angels. And I think it goes back to our conversation about part 18, Nick, where we were saying that in a lot of ways, this ending of Fire Walk With Me is the quote unquote happy ending, because like if there's something in Twin Peaks that is about balance, which I think there is. I think there is like certain characters like the fireman or like the log lady seem to be talking about like this union or this balance between, you know, nature and humans and all of this. And Laura's own agency in her decision to put on the ring and be killed, although it's dark and it's, you know, it's horrific and it is bloody and just in all other ways negative. It ends with her experiencing grace, or she sees the angel that she didn't see in the train car that Ronette did see. So the angel that disappeared from her painting, symbolizing her loss of hope and her or like the log lady said it, where all goodness is gone. She came very close to that, where she, you know, Bob would have inhabited her, but she avoided that. She didn't end in that way, even though it ended with her death. she chose that, and that was one of her few moments of agency, and it results in her being, by all accounts of what we see, happy in some sense, and that Dale Cooper's subversion of this is like the sort of emblematic of his hubris that gets explored a lot in The Return. So while this ending, like everything leading up to it is just terrifying. We have the train car scene, and we have this Red Room stuff where Bob seems to be like harvesting all of Leland's Garmin Bozia for Mike in the arm, and you're like, wait, are all these characters evil? Are they good? Like, what is happening? If there's so much tension and negativity, and then it ends this way. It ends with Dale smiling gently at Laura, and Laura looking across the room and seeing her angel, and she smiles and she's free and she is no longer suffering, and it just ends. It ends with a shot of her smiling face, not of her whispering mysteriously into Dale's ear again, in restarting some sort of cycle. It just ends, and I think that there's this ending is really fundamental to understanding what Dale Cooper undoes by quote-unquote saving Laura, because we witness her being saved in the religious sense kind of here, like the whole angels absolve her of her suffering thing, and then Dale saves her, and it results in the Carrie Page storyline, which of course we've spoken at length about. But truly one of my favorite endings to any film I've ever seen, just because of how it really makes you wonder, like, what did I just watch for the last hour and a half, 2 hours I've been watching this, and how does it all add up? And it makes every rewatch, like, it makes me be sort of looking out for clues as to why she could possibly experience some sort of grace from that scenario. But yeah, absolutely one of my favorite endings of anything.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't really know what to add. I basically agree with all of that. This is a great ending. This is Laura finding peace. This was also The Return notwithstanding. It's, again, Twin Peaks fans didn't like this movie too much because, the show ended on the Bob being inside Cooper and Cooper being trapped in the Red Room, and people wanted some resolution to that, I think, and which this movie doesn't provide, but this still kind of wraps up Twin Peaks in a way, even though I couldn't see it for years. But looking back on it, it's like, well, Cooper's trapped in the Red Room, and that's why he's able to comfort Laura here when she dies. That's why they have the shared dream. You know what I mean? So like, this does kind of, this is all we had for years, was just the original show and then this movie. So even though this isn't, a solid and complete ending, it kind of is, But yeah, the story, I'm so glad that when they did The Return, they went back and they really made this movie a huge part of just the understanding of it, or the mythology of it, or, it's like the way I see it, just to wrap this up on my end, like, the people didn't like The Return because Laura is kind of like the original series, in my opinion. Like, she's reduced to like a specter or a phantom or an object. And then the gold orb thing, people were like, well, if she's like predestined to, it takes away if she's a gold orb of superpower, then it takes away her agency and what she went through in Fire Walk with Me. And like, I don't really think that it does, because it all ties back into this movie anyway. So it's kind of hard to explain. Like, I don't think that what happened.
Yeah, no, I don't think that the orb thing. I don't think that it contradicts anything that we see either in The Run or in this film.
Yeah, I think that this is all
like, it doesn't really affect the way that I read it or react emotionally to it.
Yeah, I just I've read a few things. It's like, well, hey, like if this is all pre-planned out, then she suffered for nothing, or what's the deal? And I'm just like, nah, like Laura still makes her own decisions, and whether there's a gold orb inside of her or not, or whatever the case may be, like this movie's like the testament to her struggle, and nothing that happens in The Return negates this story. In fact, it strengthens it in a way. So anyway, this movie is the central point, the linchpin, pardon the pun, of all of this stuff, is the way I see it. Or at least that's how it's been with The Return coming out, and the books and the context, and looking back over the whole body of work for 30 years or whatever. Like, this is what it's all about.
Yeah, it's essential for sure. Like, especially in light of The Return, I think, like, so much so that I think it actually ties back into The Return more than probably most of the original run of the show, honestly. Like, I couldn't really imagine watching The Return without this film as a foundation, just because it's like nearly everything that we see in this film that felt like a one-off ultimately got elaborated upon to some degree in The Return.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, it is like a huge source material for it, and I don't know that like I don't think your experience is going to be fundamentally ruined if you watch The Return before you see Fire Walk with Me, but I think you're going to be a lot more confused for sure in what is already a confusing viewing. But I think it might have the same effect where if you watch The Return and you're like, what the fuck did I just see? And then you go and watch Fire Walk with Me, you're like, oh, okay, so this kind of makes sense. And then you go back and watch The Return. I don't know. Kind of like what I did with Fire Walk with Me. Like, wait, what the hell happened? And then you watch Fire Walk with Me again. You're like, oh, that's right. And then you go back to The Return. And you're like, okay. Still doesn't explain who Raymond Rowe is, but whatever.
Oh, man. I'm trying to imagine somebody watching The Return, like, and that was their first exposure to Twin Peaks. Like, because that's going to happen, right? Like, that there's going to be people who
must be, yeah,
watch season 3 first and then go backwards. And I'm just, like, completely fascinated by the experiences of those people. I think we need to get somebody like that on the podcast at some point. We need to track that person down.
I was just thinking that.
Absolutely.
And have a talking to about them.
If that person, like you said, I'm sure it's happened, but if there's somebody who doesn't know anything about Twin Peaks and their first exposure is watching the Showtime show and coming away going, man, that was super cool. Like, I want to know more about Twin Peaks. Like, yeah, I want to meet that.
Yes.
I want to meet that person. I know they exist.
This is the official call. If you watched The Return before anything else, please email us 119podcast@gmail.com. But yeah, I don't have too much more to say about this film. I think we pretty much covered like all the angles that I really care to talk about with it. I mean, obviously doesn't mean that there isn't more to say about it, but yeah, I think that this film is I think it's really great. I think it's really emotionally potent. I think it's just really well made generally, and it's definitely like one of my favorite Lynch films, like probably top 5. Which is a difficult list to crack, considering he has like multiple masterpieces under his belt. But I don't know, where would you guys rank this in terms of like Lynch films?
It's in my top 5. It's in my top 10 favorite films. Period. I guess that, like that there's like that's like a bit of a loaded thing to say because it carries my whole fandom of Twin Peaks with it. But like you were saying, Jeremiah, I think that Fire Walk with Me is sort of the central like piece that everything else hinges upon, and so it definitely is among my favorite movies. Period. And there's not much I'd put before it. Mulholland Drive, maybe Blue Velvet. Maybe Inland Empire, but probably not. And then it's right there. It's right up there as one of my favorites.
Nice. Yeah, I don't. It's tough. I really don't know. I don't know where I rank it. The problem is like this was my first exposure to. I mean, that's not true. Did I see Blue Velvet first? I don't know. But as far as my introduction to Twin Peaks, like this was it. And now that we've gone all this time and the return, and now it's like I said, this is the central thing. This defines Twin Peaks for me. It's what I think connects everything. I'm kind of in the same boat. Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, and Fire Walk with Me. Maybe. Yeah, those are probably my top three. So this one, and there's stuff about this movie that still feels incomplete at places, but it's just kind of like transcended all of that stuff, and I don't know. It's hard to explain. Super complicated, but I do love it. I watch it all the time. It's great.
Cool. Well, on that note, Jeremiah, thanks for taking so much time to talk with us about this thing. We're really, really happy that we had you on here. Just your knowledge of the show, your attention to detail. You were the perfect person to have on here, and I really want to thank you for hopping on with us.
Hey, thanks. It was super great. I love this movie. Love talking about Twin Peaks. I'm glad we broke it up in two parts. Because there's just so much to talk about. So I really appreciate you guys having me on, and maybe we can do something in similar capacity down the road.
Yeah, man. Anytime. So yeah, that's gonna do it for us for this episode. If you have any thoughts about anything that we've said, or if you're one of those those rare breed of people who saw The Return first, please email us at 119podcast@gmail.com. You could find us on Twitter at 119podcast. My name is Nick. You could find me on Twitter at strenuousorb. Dylan is at Piff Dylan, and Jeremiah is at Take the Ring 430. And of course, you'll also owe it to yourself, if you're a Twin Peaks fan, to check out Jeremiah's great YouTube channel, Take the Ring, where he has a handful of fantastic videos about a variety of subjects. And do you have an update that you want to give people about your next video or anything like that?
Not exactly. Just there's not tons and tons of content on there, but this is a long project, and people really like the graphics and sound quality and different, the writing and stuff. And so the response has been great. It's just tough because like I can't crank these out super fast. Like I spend time writing them. I spend time putting together the graphics packages and things. And so just be patient. The next one, it might be a few more weeks, but there's 3 episodes on there, plus the talk about Judy, which is kind of the season 3 theory. And so I do talk a lot about Fire Walk with Me. I just put out the episode 3 was the Laura Palmer episode, and I talk a lot about Fire Walk with Me. And but yeah, nothing new. I'm doing these as fast as I can. Appreciate everybody's support.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. Thanks a lot for joining us for these couple of episodes. And I don't know. I don't know when we're going to pick up this podcast again. I'm sure we're not done, but I hope that you guys have enjoyed listening to us talk about this show, and I hope you'll continue to join us in the future. Thanks a lot, guys.
Peace.